3 days in the Arizona desert without water. No shelter. No hope. Just buzzards circling overhead, waiting for her to stop breathing. When hardened trail boss Caleb Rourke found Elena Whitmore half buried in sand, barely alive, he made a choice that would shatter both their lives. He chose to fight death itself. But survival was just the beginning, because what grew between them in that lonely desert cabin would prove more dangerous than any ambush, more terrifying than dying of thirst under a merciless sun. This is their story, raw, brutal, and undeniable. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The desert had rules, simple ones. Break them, and you died. Elena Whitmore had broken every single one. She didn't know when she'd stopped counting the hours. Maybe after the first full day of stumbling through sand that burned through the soles of her boots. Maybe after her canteen ran dry and she'd actually tried, to drink her own tears before realizing she had none left to cry. The human body, she'd learned in those 72 hours, was just a machine. And machines broke down when you ran them without fuel. The sand beneath her cheek felt like broken glass. She couldn't remember lying down, couldn't remember deciding to stop walking. One moment she'd been putting one foot in front of the other, the next she was horizontal, half buried, watching the sky turn from blue to white to something that hurt to look at. Above her, black shapes wheeled in lazy circles. She knew what they were waiting for. Her lips had cracked 3 hours ago, or maybe 3 years, time didn't work right anymore, and when she tried to wet them with her tongue, the tongue itself felt like leather, like something dead already. The metallic taste of blood had followed, but even that had dried up eventually. Her body was conserving resources, shutting down non-essential systems. Soon her heart would be non-essential too. The thought should have scared her. It didn't. Fear required energy, and she had none left. What she did have were memories. They came in fragments now, disjointed and bright against the gathering dark at the edges of her vision. The stagecoach. That's where this had started. 3 days ago, a lifetime ago, she'd been sitting inside that rattling wooden box, her carpet bag wedged between her feet, trying not to wrinkle her good dress. The one she'd planned to wear when she arrived in Phoenix, when she started her new life as a governess for the Hartwell family. Respectable work, clean work. The kind of work that didn't leave your hands rough or your back broken. She'd left St. Louis with such certainty, such hope. 23 years old and finally free of her aunt's house, that suffocating parlor where she'd spent 6 years being reminded daily that she was charity, an obligation, a burden graciously borne. The stagecoach had seemed like an escape, like a door opening. It had been a door, all right, straight into hell. She could still hear the gunshots, still see the driver's body tumbling from his perch, hitting the ground like a sack of grain. The horses had screamed. She hadn't known horses could scream like that. And then the coach was tipping, rolling, the world spinning into chaos and dust and the sharp crack of wood splitting. When she'd crawled out of the wreckage, ears ringing, blood running into her left eye from a gash on her forehead, the outlaws were already dismounting. 4 of them. Maybe 5. She couldn't remember their faces now, just the cold efficiency with which they'd moved through the wreckage, taking everything, money, jewelry, luggage. One of the passengers, a mining engineer from Denver, had tried to fight back. Elena had looked away before the shot, but she'd heard it. Heard the way a man sounds when a bullet punches through his chest. Heard him trying to breathe through the hole. After that, no one else had resisted. The outlaws had taken what they wanted and left the survivors to sort themselves out. No horses, no water, no supplies. Just 7 people scattered across the desert floor like broken dolls, and the slow realization that they were 40 miles from anywhere. The others had made different choices. The mining engineer's wife had sat down in the sand and refused to move. Just sat there, keening softly, rocking back and forth. The salesman from Tucson had struck out northwest, certain he knew the way to the nearest settlement. 2 others had gone south together, sharing one canteen between them. Elena had gone east, alone, because the driver had once mentioned a ranch in that direction, and east had seemed as good as any other direction when you were going to die anyway. She'd been wrong about that. Some directions were worse than others. Now, with the sun cooking her alive and the buzzards growing braver, she understood the truth. There were no good choices in the desert, only different ways to die. Her chest rose, fell, rose again. Each breath took effort now, conscious effort, like her lungs had forgotten how to work on their own and needed reminding. Her pulse hammered in her ears, too fast, too weak. Thready, her father would have called it. He'd been a doctor before the cholera took him. He would have known exactly what was happening to her body right now. Would have been able to explain the stages of dehydration, the way the blood thickened, the way the organs began to fail. She wished he were here, not to save her, that was beyond saving now, but just so she wouldn't die alone. The sky darkened slightly. Not sunset. A shadow. One of the buzzards had landed. She could see it in her peripheral vision, a hunched black shape, head cocked, watching her with one bright eye, waiting for her to stop moving. They wouldn't touch her until she stopped moving. That was another rule, nature's rule. She wanted to scream at it, wanted to throw something, but her arms wouldn't respond anymore and her throat was sealed shut. And anyway, what was the point? The bird was just doing what birds did, following the rules. Everything followed the rules out here. Everything except the people stupid enough to think they could cross this wasteland and come out alive. Her vision was going now. Gray creeping in from the sides, narrowing the world to a tunnel. She could still see the sky, that merciless white-hot sky, but it was getting smaller, farther away. This was it then. 23 years. A lifetime of trying to be good, to be useful, to earn her place in a world that had never quite wanted her. And it ended here, in the sand, with vultures for company, and no one to mark where she fell. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 6 years in her aunt's house being told she was nothing. Turned out her aunt had been right. Her chest rose one more time. Fell. Rose. Hoofbeats. The sound was so unexpected, so impossible, that at first she thought it was her brain misfiring. Some final hallucination cooked up by a dying mind desperate for hope. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, closer. The buzzard took flight with an indignant squawk. Elena tried to turn her head, tried to see, but her muscles wouldn't cooperate. She was locked in place, a corpse already, just waiting for her heart to get the message. The hoofbeats stopped. Boot steps. Heavy. Crunching in the sand. A shadow fell across her face, blocking out that terrible sun, and for one moment the relief was so intense she almost wept. Christ! The word came from above her, rough and low, threaded through with something that might have been shock or horror. She tried to speak, tried to say help or water or please, but nothing came out. Not even a whisper, just a clicking sound from somewhere in her throat. The shadow shifted. She felt more than saw someone crouching down beside her, felt the displacement of air, the sudden proximity of another living thing. "Can you hear me?" Definitely a man. His voice had that particular gravel that came from years of shouting over wind and distance. A working voice, calloused, like his hands probably were. She managed something between a nod and a twitch. All right, listen. I'm going to move you, and it's going to hurt. You understand?" Another twitch, the best she could do. Hell with it. Hands slid under her, one beneath her shoulders, one beneath her knees. And then she was being lifted, and he'd been right. It did hurt. Everything hurt. Her skin felt like it was tearing away from the muscle, her joints screaming at the movement, her head lolling back because her neck couldn't support it anymore. She got a glimpse of his face, weathered, maybe 40, maybe older. The sun aged men out here faster than anywhere else. Dark hair, dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife. Hard lines. Hard mouth. A hard man for a hard land. He was already moving, carrying her like she weighed nothing, striding back toward wherever he'd come from with the kind of grim determination that suggested he'd done this before. Found dying things. Carried them. She wanted to thank him. Wanted to tell him it was too late, that he should save his energy, that she was already gone. But the gray was rushing in faster now, swallowing everything, and the last thing she registered before unconsciousness took her was the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her ear, strong and even and absolutely certain. When awareness came back, it came in pieces. Coolness first. Blessed, beautiful coolness against her skin. Shadow, the absence of that killing sun. Then sound. A crackling. Fire? No, not dangerous fire. controlled fire, a hearth or a stove. Then smell. Smoke, yes, but also something else, something medicinal. Herbs, maybe. Elena's eyes opened to slits, wood beams overhead, rough-hewn, dark with age. Adobe walls thick enough to keep out the heat. A single room sparsely furnished. A table. 2 chairs. A stove in the corner, something simmering on top of it. A shelf with books, more books than she would have expected, and a few tools hung on pegs. She was lying on something soft. A bed. An actual bed, with sheets and a pillow that smelled like cedar and sunlight. Her throat felt like someone had taken sandpaper to it, but she managed to croak out a sound. Immediately, boot steps. He appeared in her line of vision, the man from before, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're awake." Not a question, just a statement of fact. She tried to speak again, but her tongue was still leather. "Don't!" He moved to the table, poured water from a ceramic pitcher into a tin cup. "Slow. Just wet your mouth first. Don't swallow yet." He slid one hand behind her head, lifting it gently, and brought the cup to her lips. The first touch of water was agony. Her cracked lips split wider, and she tasted blood mixed with the water. But she did what he said. Just wet her mouth. Let the moisture seep into the parched tissues. "Good. Now a sip. Small one." She swallowed. The water burned going down like drinking broken glass, but behind the pain was relief so intense it made her dizzy. Another. She took another sip. Then another. He rationed it carefully, never letting her take too much at once, keeping one hand on the back of her head the whole time. When he finally set the cup aside, she found her voice. Barely. "How long?" 3 hours since I brought you in. 4 days since whatever happened to you happened." He pulled one of the chairs over, sat down so he was at eye level with her. "You were maybe 2 hours from dead when I found you. Maybe less." 4 days. She'd been in the desert for 4 days, not 3. She'd lost a whole day somewhere. "The others," her voice cracked. "The stagecoach. I'll ride out tomorrow. Look for survivors, but I wouldn't count on it." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that knew exactly what the desert did to people. "Right now, we focus on keeping you alive." Why? The question surprised them both. Elena hadn't meant to ask it, hadn't meant to sound so hollow, so defeated. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "You really want to know?" She nodded. "I've found 6 people in the desert over the past 10 years. All of them past saving by the time I got there. You're the first one who was still breathing." He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. Seemed worth trying something different. It wasn't sentiment, wasn't kindness, just pragmatism. A man changing his approach because the old one hadn't worked. Somehow, that made it easier to accept. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb. Caleb Rourke." "Elena Whitmore." "Miss or Mrs.?" "Miss." He nodded, filing that away. "You were headed to Phoenix?" "Yes. I had..." She paused, the loss hitting her fresh. "I had a position waiting, as a governess." "You tell anyone you were coming? Anyone who'd notice if you didn't show up?" She thought of the Hartwells, waiting for a governess who would never arrive. Would they assume she'd changed her mind? That she'd taken their advance payment and run? "They'll notice," she said quietly. "But they won't know what happened. They'll just think I didn't come." "Family? Someone who'd look for you?" "No, just that." "No." Because there was no one. Her parents dead. Her brother lost to fever. Her aunt would probably be relieved to hear she was gone. One less mouth to feed, one less reminder of family obligation. Caleb absorbed this with a single nod. "Then you've got 2 choices. I can take you to the nearest town, that's Red Mesa, about 20 miles west, and you can try to sort out passage to Phoenix from there. Or you can stay here until you're strong enough to travel on your own terms." "How long would that take?" "Honestly? A week, minimum, maybe 2. You're in bad shape, Miss Whitmore. Dehydration's the obvious problem, but you've got sun poisoning, heat exhaustion, and what looks like the start of an infection in that cut on your head. You need rest, clean water, food you can actually digest." She closed her eyes. "A week. 2 weeks. Dependent on a stranger's charity, a burden once again. But what choice did she have? "I'll stay," she whispered. If that's all right." Wouldn't have offered if it wasn't. He stood, moving back to the stove. She watched him work, efficient and practiced, ladling something from the pot into a bowl. Broth, she realized when he brought it over, thin and pale, with bits of something floating in it. Chicken stock, weak. "Your stomach won't handle anything heavier yet." He helped her sit up, propping her against the wall with pillows, and handed her the bowl. "Slow. And if you feel sick, tell me." She took the bowl with shaking hands. The warmth alone was a comfort. She sipped carefully, and the broth was bland, barely seasoned, but to her ravaged system it tasted like the finest meal she'd ever had. Caleb sat back down, watching her with the same neutral expression he'd worn since she woke up. Not hostile, not friendly, just observing. "You said you'd look for others tomorrow," Elena said between sips. "From the stagecoach." "Yeah. They went different directions. The survivors, I mean. We scattered." "Smart. Gave you all a chance, however small." "The driver died in the attack, and one of the passengers, a man from Denver." Her hands tightened on the bowl. "The outlaws shot him." "How many outlaws?" "4, maybe 5. I didn't get a good look." "They take everything?" "Everything. Horses, luggage, money. Left us with nothing." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "That sounds like the Garrett crew. They've been working this route for 6 months. Territory Marshal's been looking for them, but they're ghosts." He paused. "You're lucky they didn't do worse." She knew what he meant, knew what men like that did to women when they had the chance. The fact that she'd been spared that particular horror was cold comfort now. "The woman," Elena said quietly, "the dead man's wife. She wouldn't walk, just sat down in the sand and stopped. Shock. Happens sometimes. Brain just quits." "Is she dead now?" "Probably." The bluntness should have stung, but Elena found it oddly refreshing. No false comfort, no meaningless reassurance, just truth. She finished the broth. Caleb took the bowl without comment, set it aside. "You should sleep," he said. "Body's still trying to recover. Sleep's the best thing for it." "Where will you—" "Floor's fine. I've slept worse places." He was already pulling blankets from a chest, making himself a pallet near the stove. The efficiency of it suggested he'd done this before too. Maybe not with people, but with injured animals. A foal with a broken leg, a dog torn up by coyotes. Same principle. Save what could be saved. Bury the rest. Elena lay back down, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. The bed was simple. Just a mattress stuffed with straw, a few rough blankets, but after 4 days in the sand, it felt like luxury. She should say something, should thank him, should... Sleep took her before she could finish the thought. The fever came that night. Elena woke in darkness, burning. Her skin felt too tight, her blood too hot. She tried to kick off the blankets, but they were tangled around her legs, trapping her, and panic surged through her chest. "Easy," Caleb's voice, calm and close. Then his hands, cooler than her skin, gently pulling the blankets free. "Fever," she managed. "I know. I've been expecting it." He placed a hand on her forehead, swore softly. "You're running hot. Probably the infection from that head wound, maybe something else. Doesn't matter. We treat it the same way." He disappeared for a moment, then returned with a basin of water and cloth. He dunked the cloth, wrung it out, and pressed it against her forehead. The coolness was heaven and hell at once, relief and shock. "This is going to be a long night," Caleb said, his voice steady. "I need you to stay with me. You understand?" "I'll try." "Not good enough, you will, because I didn't drag you back from death just to lose you to a fever." There was something in his tone, not quite anger, but close, a frustration that sounded almost personal. The night became a blur after that, heat and cold, chills that made her teeth chatter, then sweats that soaked through her nightdress. When had she been changed into a nightdress? Then chills again. Caleb was there through all of it, changing the cool cloths, helping her drink water even when she didn't think she could swallow, sometimes just sitting beside the bed with his hand on her wrist, fingers on her pulse. At some point, deep in the worst of it, she started talking. Rambling, really. Fever dreams spilling out into words. She talked about her father, the way he'd smelled like carbolic and tobacco. About her mother who'd sung while she worked, even when there was nothing to sing about. About the house in St. Louis, her aunt's house, and how the wallpaper in her room had been yellow and peeling, and she'd spent hours staring at it, finding faces in the patterns. She talked about the stagecoach, about the fear, about the moment she'd realized she was going to die and how calm she'd felt, how final. Caleb didn't respond, just kept changing the cloths, kept making her drink, kept checking her pulse. Somewhere near dawn, the fever broke. Elena surfaced slowly, awareness returning like the tide. She was drenched in sweat, her nightdress sticking to her skin, but the terrible heat was gone. She felt hollow, wrung out, but clear-headed. Caleb was still there, sitting in the chair beside the bed, arms crossed, head tilted back against the wall. His eyes were closed, but she didn't think he was asleep, just resting. Caleb. His eyes opened immediately. He straightened, leaned forward. "Fever's broken," she said. "I know. About 10 minutes ago." He stood, felt her forehead with the back of his hand. "You'll probably spike again tonight. Fevers like this come in waves. But you made it through the first one, which means you'll probably make it through the rest." "Probably. Best I can give you." She appreciated that. The honesty. No promises he couldn't keep. She gestured vaguely at her sweat-soaked state. "I need to. There's a wash basin in the corner. I'll heat some water. Turn my back. You clean up best you can, then get back in bed. There's a clean nightdress on the chest." He was already moving, pouring water into a pot on the stove, stoking the fire. True to his word, once the water was warm, he poured it into the basin, set it on a stool near the bed, and turned his back. Elena struggled upright. Her muscles trembled with the effort, but she managed. The warm water felt incredible on her skin, washing away the sickness sweat. She worked quickly, efficiently, aware of Caleb's presence even with his back turned. The clean nightdress was soft cotton, worn but clean, and clearly not made for a woman. It hung loose on her frame, but she didn't care. "I'm done," she said, climbing back into bed. He turned, gathered up the soiled nightdress and linens without comment, and carried them outside. When he came back, he had fresh bedding. "You don't have to, Yes, I do." He stripped the bed with practiced efficiency, Elena still in it, somehow managing to replace the sheets without making her move more than necessary. Cleanliness matters. Infection's already got a foothold. No sense giving it more help. Once the bed was remade, he brought her more broth. She drank it slowly, feeling strength seep back into her muscles. Not much, but some. "You talked a lot during the fever," Caleb said, settling back into his chair. Elena froze. "What did I say?" "Mostly nonsense. Names I didn't recognize. Something about wallpaper." He paused. "You said dying felt calm." She set down the bowl. "I meant that." "I know you did. That's what worried me." She looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since waking. His face was drawn, shadows under his eyes. He'd been up all night, fighting for her life while she'd been lost in fever dreams. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "Whether I live or die?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, 10 years ago, I found a girl. Couldn't have been more than 16. Same as you, half dead from dehydration, out in the sun too long. I brought her back here, tried to help her." His voice went flat. "She died anyway, second day. Fever took her. I'm sorry. Don't be. Wasn't your fault." He met her eyes. "But I've thought about her every day since. Wondered if I'd done something different, moved faster, known more." He shook his head. "When I saw you out there, saw those buzzards circling, I thought, here we go again. Another body for the desert. But then I got close enough to see you were still breathing, and I thought, maybe this time I get it right." It wasn't about her at all, Elena realized. It was about the girl from 10 years ago. About a debt Caleb had been carrying, about a second chance to do better. She should have felt diminished by that. Should have felt like she was just a proxy, a stand-in for someone else. Instead, she felt understood. "I won't die," she said quietly. "Not after you've worked this hard." "Damn right you won't." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. And for the first time since the stagecoach, since the desert, since everything had gone to hell, Elena felt something she thought she'd lost. Hope. The days blurred together after that, marked by small victories. Sitting up without help, eating solid food. Biscuits first, then eggs, then meat. Walking from the bed to the chair without her legs giving out, Caleb ran his household with military precision. Up at dawn, chores done before the heat set in. He worked for a ranch, she learned. Rode out most days to check fences, move cattle, do whatever needed doing. But he always came back by evening, and he always checked on her first thing. He didn't talk much. Not about himself, anyway. But she learned things through observation. He was educated. The books on his shelf weren't for show. She'd caught him reading more than once, and the titles were dense. Philosophy, history, a battered copy of Paradise Lost, margins filled with notes in tight handwriting. He was careful. Every action deliberate, every movement economical, nothing wasted. Not motion, not words, not supplies. He was lonely. She saw it in the way he'd pause sometimes when she spoke, like he'd forgotten what conversation sounded like her voice was music he hadn't heard in years. On the 5th day, Elena was strong enough to sit outside. Caleb had rigged a chair in the shade of the cabin's overhang, positioned to catch the breeze. She sat there in the late afternoon, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat. She still got chills sometimes, and watched the desert. It looked different now, less hostile. Or maybe she was just seeing it through different eyes. Caleb was working nearby, repairing a saddle. He'd set up his workstation within earshot, close enough to help if she needed it, far enough to give her space. "How did you end up out here?" Elena asked. He didn't look up from the leather. "Long story. I've got time." A pause. Then, Army first. Cavalry. Did a tour in Texas during the Apache campaigns. Got out in '72, hired on with the Broken Sea Ranch. Been here ever since. You never wanted to go back east? To wherever you're from? Pennsylvania. And no, nothing back there for me. Family? Dead. My father drank himself to death. My mother followed a year later. Grief, the doctor said, but I think she just gave up. He set down his tools, finally looked at her. What about you? You said no family, but that cut you made earlier suggested there was someone once. Elena pulled the blanket tighter. My parents died of cholera when I was 17. My brother, younger than me, died of fever a year later. I went to live with my aunt in St. Louis. She paused. She took me in because it was expected, family obligation, but she made sure I knew I was a burden. 6 years of being reminded I was living on charity. That why you took the governess position? That, and I was running out of options. I'm 23, unmarried, no prospects. Teaching someone else's children seemed better than being unwanted in my aunt's house. And now? Now I don't even have that. The words came out harder than she'd intended. The Hartwells won't wait. They'll find someone else. And I can't go back to my aunt. So you start over. With what? I lost everything in the attack. No money, no clothes, no references. I'm stranded. Caleb went back to his work. You're alive, that's not nothing. Easy for you to say. You think this is easy? He looked up again, and there was something sharp in his eyes. You think I'm out here by choice, living alone in the middle of nowhere, working myself to the bone for wages that barely cover supplies? I'm here because everywhere else was worse. Because at least out here, the rules are simple. You work or you die. No one pretends to care about you while they're cutting you down behind your back. The bitterness in his voice caught her off guard. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean... Forget it. He stood abruptly, gathering his tools. Point is, you're not the first person to lose everything and have to rebuild. Won't be the last either, but feeling sorry for yourself doesn't change anything. You want different, you make it different. He walked off before she could respond, disappearing around the corner of the cabin. Elena sat in the silence, stung. But underneath the sting was recognition. He was right. She'd been wallowing, drowning in what she'd lost instead of figuring out what to do next. The question was, what could she do next? That night, after a quiet dinner where neither of them spoke much, Elena was sitting on the bed, working through some basic sewing, mending one of Caleb's shirts. She'd insisted on being useful when he suddenly spoke. There's a town, Red Mesa. I mentioned it before. She looked up. The one 20 miles west? Yeah, small place. Maybe 200 people. They've got a school, but they've been without a teacher for 6 months. The last one left after a dispute with the school board. He was standing by the window, looking out at the dark. If you can teach children to read and write, they might hire you. Elena's hands stilled on the shirt. You think so? I know the man who runs the board. Walter Brigg. He owns the biggest ranch in the area, the Broken Sea, the one I work for. He's practical. If you can do the job, he won't care about your circumstances. But I have no references, no proof I can even teach. Can you read? Of course. Write? Do arithmetic? Yes. Then you can teach. The rest is just showing up and doing the work. He turned to face her. I'm riding into town in 2 days to pick up supplies. If you're well enough, you can come with me. Meet Brigg, see if it's a fit. It was an olive branch, an apology for his harsh words earlier, delivered in the only way he knew how, through action, not sentiment. I'd like that, Elena said. Thank you. He nodded once, then went back to staring out the window. But Elena thought she saw the tension leave his shoulders, just slightly. The ride to Red Mesa took 3 hours. Caleb had set her on his mare, a patient, steady animal named Juniper. While he rode a gelding he called simply Horse. They moved at an easy pace, stopping twice to let Elena rest. She was stronger than she'd been a week ago, but still recovering. The sun bothered her less now, though Caleb had insisted she wear a wide-brimmed hat to protect her healing skin. Red Mesa appeared on the horizon gradually, shimmering in the heat. Adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza, a church steeple rising above them. It wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few houses. But it was civilization. People stared as they rode in. Elena felt their eyes on her, curious and assessing. Strangers were rare out here. Strangers riding in with Caleb Rourke were rarer still. Ignore them, Caleb said quietly. Small towns live on gossip. He led them straight to the largest building on the main street, a 2-story structure with a sign reading Broken Sea Ranch Office. They tied the horses outside, and Caleb held the door open for her. Inside was cooler, dimmer. A man sat behind a large desk, poring over ledgers. He looked up when they entered, and his weathered face creased into surprise. Caleb, wasn't expecting you until next week. Had reason to come early, Caleb gestured to Elena. Walter Brigg, this is Miss Elena Whitmore. She's looking for work. Brigg stood, revealing himself to be tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 60, but still strong. His eyes were keen as they swept over Elena, taking in the borrowed clothes, the fading bruises on her face, the general air of someone recently catastrophic. What kind of work? He asked. Teaching, Elena said, finding her voice. I understand you need a school teacher. We do. He came around the desk, leaned against it, arms crossed. What are your qualifications? I was educated by my father, who was a physician. I can read, write, and do mathematics. I have some French, basic Latin, geography, history. She lifted her chin. I was on my way to Phoenix to work as a governess when the stagecoach was attacked. I lost everything, but not my education. The Garrett crew? I believe so. Brigg looked at Caleb. You find her? In the desert 4 days ago. Lucky you found her at all. Lucky she's still alive, Caleb corrected. Brigg turned back to Elena. His expression was unreadable. I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitmore. This town has burned through 3 teachers in 2 years. The work is hard, the pay is minimal, and the children can be difficult. The school board expects results, and the parents expect miracles. If you take this job, you'll be scrutinized constantly, and if you fail, you'll be run out just like the others. I understand. Do you? He leaned forward. This isn't a genteel position in a nice family's home. This is frontier teaching. Half the children barely speak English. Some of them have never seen the inside of a classroom. You'll be starting from nothing. Then I'll fit right in, Elena said quietly, because I'm starting from nothing too. A long silence. Then Brigg smiled. Just slightly, but it was there. All right, trial basis. 1 month. Room and board provided. There's a small quarters attached to the school. $20 a month to start, more if you prove yourself. You start Monday. Elena's heart leaped. Monday? But that's 3 days away, I know. Can you do it? She thought of Caleb's words. You want different? You make it different. Yes, she said firmly. I can do it? Good. Brig extended his hand and Elena shook it. His grip was strong, testing her. She squeezed back, meeting his eyes. When he released her hand, he was smiling wider. Caleb, show her the school. Let her see what she's getting into. If she changes her mind before Monday, I'll understand. She won't change her mind, Caleb said. He said it with such certainty that Elena almost believed him. The school was a single room attached to a small house. 2 rooms, really, barely enough for one person. But it was clean, and it was hers. And standing in the doorway, looking at the empty benches and the dusty chalkboard, Elena felt something kindle in her chest. Purpose. It needs work, Caleb said from behind her. But the structure's sound. It's perfect, Elena said. You say that now. She turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, and for a moment she couldn't read his expression. Thank you, she said, for bringing me here, for giving me this chance. Brig gave you the chance. I just made the introduction. You know that's not true. He was quiet for a moment, then, you'll do well here. How can you be sure? Because you're stubborn, and stubborn people don't quit easy. It wasn't a compliment, not exactly, but coming from him, it felt like one. They rode back to the cabin in comfortable silence, the sun setting behind them, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Elena should have been thinking about the job, about Monday, about everything she needed to do to prepare. But instead, she found herself thinking about Caleb, about the way he'd defended her to Brig without making it obvious, about the way he'd said she won't change her mind like he knew her better than she knew herself, about the way she was going to miss this, the quiet evenings, the simple routine, the presence of someone who asked nothing of her except to survive. When they reached this cabin, Caleb helped her down from Juniper. Her legs were sore from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her, hands steady on her waist, and for a moment they were very close. She looked up. He looked down. Neither of them moved. Then Caleb stepped back, releasing her, his expression carefully neutral. You should rest, he said. Big day Monday. Right, yes. Elena turned toward the cabin, flustered, confused by the sudden electricity in the air. But as she walked inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, something neither of them was ready to name. The 3 days before Monday felt like 3 years. Elena spent them at the cabin, preparing, or trying to prepare. The truth was she had no materials, no books, no slate or chalk, just her mind and whatever Caleb could spare from his meager supplies. He gave her paper, precious out here, expensive, and a pencil worn down to a stub. She used them to sketch out lesson plans, trying to remember what her father had taught her, how he'd made Latin conjugations feel like puzzles instead of punishment. Caleb watched her work with that same quiet observation he applied to everything. He'd come in from the day's labor, dust in his hair, sweat staining his shirt, and find her hunched over the table, scribbling notes by lamplight. He never interrupted, just washed up, started dinner, moved around her like she was a piece of furniture he'd learned to navigate. But on the second night, he broke the silence. You're going to wear yourself out before you even start. Elena looked up, blinking. Her eyes ached from the dim light. I need to be ready. You're as ready as you'll get. The rest you learn by doing. He set a plate in front of her, beans, cornbread, a slice of salt pork. Eat, then sleep. You're no good to those kids if you collapse on day 1. I won't collapse. Elena. The use of her first name stopped her. He rarely used it. I've seen men work themselves to death trying to be perfect. The desert's full of their bones. Don't be one of them. She set down the pencil. What if I fail? Then you fail, and you try again the next day. He sat down across from her with his own plate. Brig gave you a month. That's 30 days to figure it out. You don't need to solve everything tonight. You make it sound simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. People complicate things because they're scared. They pile on rules and plans and expectations until they can't move under the weight. But most of the time, you just need to show up and do the next thing in front of you. Elena picked up her fork, but didn't eat yet. Is that how you live? Just doing the next thing? It's how I survive. That's not the same as living. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered across his face. Not anger, something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came when two people had said something true and needed time to sit with it. Later, lying in bed while Caleb settled onto his pallet by the stove, Elena stared at the ceiling beams and thought about his words, about the difference between surviving and living. She'd been surviving for 6 years in her aunt's house, surviving the grief of losing her family, surviving the slow erosion of her self-worth. Maybe it was time to try living instead. On Monday morning, Caleb loaded her few belongings, pitifully few, just the borrowed clothes and the notes she'd made, onto Juniper. The ride to Red Mesa felt shorter this time, though that might have been because Elena's stomach was twisted into beetles to knots. "You'll be fine," Caleb said as they approached the town. "You keep saying that, because it's true. What if the children hate me? What if I can't control them? What if—" "Elena." He reined in horse, and Juniper stopped beside them. The desert stretched out around them, vast and indifferent. "You survived 4 days in that." He gestured at the emptiness. "You survived fever, dehydration, and an outlaw attack. You think a room full of children is worse than any of that?" When he put it that way, it sounded ridiculous. "No," she admitted. "Then stop borrowing trouble. You'll have plenty of real problems soon enough. Don't invent extras." They rode on. The school looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, more real. Elena dismounted, her legs steadier now, and Caleb handed down her things. A few people had gathered, parents, she assumed, with children in tow. They watched with open curiosity as she approached. Caleb stayed mounted. "I'll check on you Friday. Need anything before then? Send word with one of the ranch hands. They pass through town most days." "You're leaving?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "I've got work. Fences don't fix themselves." But he hesitated, looking down at her. "You'll be fine." "You've said that. I'll keep saying it until you believe it." Then he wheeled horse around and rode off, dust rising in his wake, and Elena felt absurdly abandoned, which was stupid. She'd known he couldn't stay. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. She was just... what? What was she to him? A project, a debt paid, a ghost laid to rest, nothing more. She turned to face the school and found Walter Briggs standing on the steps. "Ready, Miss Whitmore?" "No." "Yes." "Good. Let me introduce you to your students." The children filed in slowly, eyeing her like she was a snake that might bite. There were 12 of them, ranging from maybe 6 years old to 14. Dirty faces, suspicious eyes, clothes patched and repatched. These weren't the children of wealthy families. These were ranch kids, farm kids, the sons and daughters of people who worked with their hands and expected their children to do the same. Brigg made brief introductions, names Elena knew she'd forget immediately, then left her to it. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Elena stood at the front of the room, looking at 12 hostile faces, and felt panic claw at her throat. She'd imagined this moment 100 times in the past 3 days, had planned what she'd say, how she'd say it. But now, facing the reality, all her careful words evaporated, so she did the only thing she could think of. She told the truth. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. That got their attention. A few of the older ones exchanged glances. "I mean, I know how to read and write and do arithmetic. I can teach you those things, but I've never taught a class before, never stood in front of a room like this and tried to make anyone learn anything." She moved to the edge of the desk, perched on it. "So here's what I'm thinking. We figure it out together. You tell me what you need to learn, I'll tell you what I can teach, and we meet somewhere in the middle." A girl in the front row, maybe 10 years old with braids coming undone, raised her hand tentatively. "Yes? Miss Pritchard didn't ask us what we needed. She just told us what to do." "Well, I'm not Miss Pritchard." Elena paused. "Was she the last teacher?" Nods all around. "What happened to her?" An older boy in the back, the 14-year-old, Elena thought his name was Sam, spoke up. "She called Tommy's ma a savage. Tommy's ma is Pima. Tommy broke her chalkboard." "And the school board fired her," Elena finished. "Nah, she left on her own, said we were all beyond saving." Sam's voice was flat, but Elena heard the hurt underneath. She looked at these children, really looked at them, saw the walls they'd built, the defenses they'd learned. They'd been failed by adults before. Why should she be different? I can't promise I won't make mistakes, Elena said quietly. I probably will. A lot of them. But I won't call anyone's mother a savage, and I won't give up on you. That's the best I can offer. If that's enough, we can start. If it's not, she shrugged, well, I guess you'll break my chalkboard too. A beat of silence. Then the girl with braids smiled. Just a little. But it was there. I'm Lucy, she said, and I can't read yet. Not really. Just a few words. I'm Sam, the older boy added. I can read fine, but numbers don't make sense to me. One by one, they introduced themselves, told her what they could do, what they couldn't. It wasn't much. Most of them could barely write their names, but it was a start. By the end of that first day, Elena's voice was hoarse and her head was pounding, but she'd learned all their names, had figured out roughly where each one stood, had even managed to teach them something, just the alphabet song, simple and childish, but they'd sung it together and some of them had laughed. Small victories. That night, alone in the tiny quarters behind the school, Elena collapsed onto the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached, her mind raced. She kept replaying moments from the day, wondering what she should have done differently, what she'd do tomorrow. But underneath the exhaustion and the doubt was something else. Satisfaction. She'd done it. She'd survived day one. The week blurred into a rhythm. Wake at dawn. Light the stove. Make coffee. Prepare the schoolroom. Greet the children. Teach. Stumble through lessons that sometimes worked and sometimes fell apart. Send them home. Clean. Plan for tomorrow. Sleep. Repeat. By Friday, Elena felt like she'd aged 10 years. When Caleb rode into town that afternoon, she was sitting on the school steps, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, too tired to move. He dismounted, tied horse to the rail, and sat down beside her without a word. They sat in silence for a long moment. Well, he finally asked. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She turned to look at him. He looked the same as always, dusty, weathered, solid, unchanged while her whole world had been upended. Half of them can't read. The other half don't want to. I'm teaching from books that are falling apart, and I don't have nearly enough supplies. And the parents, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. The parents have opinions, so many opinions. About you? About everything. What I should teach. How I should teach it. Why their child is special and needs extra attention or less homework or a seat by the window. She dropped her head into her hands. I smiled at Mr. Henderson's son yesterday. Just smiled. This morning, Mrs. Henderson showed up to ask what my intentions were toward her boy. He's 9 years old, Caleb. Mrs. Henderson's husband left her last year. She's protective. She's insane. Little bit of both. He was quiet for a moment. You want to quit? The question should have offended her. Instead, it felt like permission. Like he was giving her a way out. Did she want to quit? Elena thought about Lucy, who'd stayed after class yesterday to practice her letters. About Sam, who'd finally understood division when she'd explained it using fence posts instead of numbers on paper. About Tommy, who'd barely said 2 words all week until today, when he'd raised his hand and correctly answered a question about state capitals. No, she said. I don't want to quit. Then don't. It's not that simple. Yeah, it is. He stood, brushed dust off his pants. You coming to dinner or not? She blinked. What? Dinner. At Briggs' place. It's Friday. Ranch tradition. All the hands eat together. He paused. You're invited. I can't just... You can. Briggs' wife, Margaret, she's been asking about you. Wants to meet the new teacher. And you need to eat something that's not beans from a can. Elena looked down at herself. She was still wearing her teaching dress, the better of the two she'd borrowed, but both were worn thin. Her hair had come loose from its pins hours ago. She probably had chalk dust on her face. I'm not presentable. Neither is anyone else. Come on. He offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. The Broken Sea Ranch house was sprawling, adobe and wood, with a wide porch and windows that glowed warm in the gathering dusk. Inside it smelled like roasting meat and fresh bread, and Elena's stomach growled so loud she was certain everyone heard. The main room was full of people, ranch hands, mostly men, but a few women too. They looked up when Caleb walked in with Elena, and conversation stuttered for a moment before resuming. "Caleb!" A woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was maybe 50, gray-streaked hair pulled back, face lined but kind. "And you must be Miss Whitmore. I'm Margaret Brigg. Welcome." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Brigg." "Oh, none of that. It's Margaret." She linked her arm through Elena's, pulling her toward the kitchen. "Come help me with the biscuits. These men are useless in the kitchen, and I could use another pair of hands." Elena glanced back at Caleb, who just shrugged and headed toward the other men. The kitchen was warm, flour-dusted, chaotic in the best way. Margaret put Elena to work immediately, and soon they were elbow-deep in dough, working in comfortable rhythm. "So," Margaret said, "how's the teaching going?" "Honestly, I have no idea." Margaret laughed. It was a full, genuine sound. "That's how you know you're doing it right. The moment you think you have it figured out, that's when it all falls apart." She shaped a biscuit with practiced hands. "The children like you. That's what matters." "How can you tell?" "Because they're still showing up. Last teacher, they started skipping after the first week. You've made it a week without losing a single one. That's something." It was something, small but real. They worked in silence for a few minutes, then Margaret spoke again, her voice carefully casual. "Caleb speaks highly of you." Elena's hands stilled in the dough. "He does?" "In his way, which means he mentioned you twice." Margaret smiled. "That's unusual. Caleb doesn't get attached to people." He's not attached. He found me in the desert, helped me recover, that's all." "Mm-hmm." Margaret's tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it, but she didn't push. Instead, she changed the subject. "You'll eat with us every Friday from now on. I won't take no for an answer." "That's very kind, but..." "No buts. You're part of this community now. And out here, community takes care of its own." Dinner was loud, chaotic, wonderful. Elena found herself seated between Caleb and a young ranch hand named Pete, who talked nonstop about a horse he was breaking. Across the table, other hands swapped stories, argued about cattle prices, complained about the heat. It felt like family, not her family. Her family had been quiet dinners, her father reading medical journals between courses, her mother humming while she served. But a family nonetheless. Caleb didn't talk much, but his presence beside her was steady, grounding. Once, when Pete's gesturing nearly knocked over her water glass, Caleb's hand shot out, catching it before it spilled. Their fingers brushed, and Elena felt that same electric jolt from before. She pulled her hand back quickly. After dinner, while Margaret and some of the other women cleaned up, Elena tried to help but was shooed away. Walter Brigg pulled her aside. "Walk with me." They stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool, stars already bright overhead. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing, the soft sounds of horses settling. "I've been hearing good things," Brigg said. "From who?" "Parents, children, Margaret." He leaned against the porch rail. "You've made a good start." "I'm barely surviving." "That's all anyone does out here. Survive and hope tomorrow's a little better than today." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm extending your trial." Elena's heart sank. "What did I do wrong?" "Wrong? Nothing. I'm extending it because you're doing well. 3 months instead of 1. Same pay, same terms. But I want to see if you can sustain it." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Winter's coming. That's when it gets hard. Cold, sickness, snow that makes travel impossible. Some of the children won't be able to make it to school for weeks at a time. You'll have to adjust, find ways to keep them learning, even when they're not there." He looked at her. "Can you do that?" "I'll find a way." "Good." He pushed off the rail. "Caleb will drive you back to town. It's late." The ride back was quiet. Caleb handled the wagon with easy competence, the horses knowing the route without much guidance. Elena sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket Margaret had insisted she take, and watched the stars. "Thank you," she said after a while. "For what?" "For bringing me tonight. I needed that." "Margaret would have tracked you down eventually anyway. She's persistent." "Still, thank you." He didn't respond, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. When they reached the school, Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist. For a moment, they stood close, his face shadowed in the darkness. "You did good this week," he said quietly. "I barely held it together." "That's still good." His hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, then dropped away. "I'll see you next Friday. You don't have to keep checking on me." "I know." But he didn't say he'd stop. Elena watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing into the darkness, and felt that strange ache again, that sense of something unfinished. She pushed it aside and went inside. The weeks folded into each other. Elena fell into the rhythm of teaching, learning as she went. She discovered that Lucy responded best to stories, that Sam needed to move while he thought, that Tommy would only speak up if directly asked. She learned to read the room, to pivot when a lesson wasn't working, to celebrate small victories and move past failures quickly. The town began to accept her. Mrs. Henderson stopped asking about her intentions and started bringing by extra vegetables from her garden. The blacksmith's wife offered to mend Elena's dresses, wouldn't take payment. Mr. Foster, who ran the general store, extended her credit for school supplies. Small kindnesses. Building blocks of belonging. But the nights were lonely. The quarters behind the school were fine for sleeping, for basic living. But they were meant for one person passing through, not for building a life. Elena would lie awake sometimes, listening to the wind, and feel the weight of solitude pressing down. She told herself she was being foolish. She had a job, a community, purpose. What more did she need? But on Friday evenings, when Caleb would ride into town and they'd head out to the ranch together, she felt something lift in her chest. And she knew, even if she wouldn't admit it, exactly what she needed. 2 months in, winter arrived with a vengeance. The temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight, and the first snow came on a Tuesday. Not much, just a dusting, but enough to make the roads treacherous. 3 children didn't show up that day, and Lucy arrived late, her lips blue with cold. Elena spent the morning teaching them closer to the stove, their breath misting in the air. The schoolroom wasn't insulated well, and the wind found every crack. By afternoon, she sent them home early, worried about the weather worsening. That night, the real storm hit. Elena woke to wind howling like something alive, rattling the windows, finding its way through gaps she didn't know existed. Snow drove sideways, piling against the walls. The stove fought a losing battle against the cold, and she could see her breath inside. She piled every blanket she had onto the bed and huddled under them, shivering, praying the storm would pass quickly. It didn't. By morning, snow had drifted 3 feet high against the door. Elena had to shove with all her strength to open it enough to squeeze through. The world outside was white, unfamiliar. The schoolyard had vanished under snow. The road was impassable. No school today. Maybe not tomorrow either. She retreated inside, fed the stove every scrap of wood she had, and tried to stay warm. By the second day, she was running low on supplies. Wood, food, oil for the lamp. She'd thought she was prepared, but she'd underestimated winter. Another mistake. Another thing she should have known. The knock on the door came at dusk. Elena opened it to find Caleb standing there, snow coating his shoulders, ice in his beard. "You look half frozen," she said. "I am half frozen." He pushed past her, carrying a large sack. "You didn't prepare for this." "I tried." "Not enough." He dumped the sack on the table. Wood. He had another sack slung over his shoulder, food. "Storm's supposed to last another 2 days, maybe 3. You wouldn't have made it." "How did you get through? The roads?" "I didn't use the roads." He was already moving, feeding wood into the stove, building the fire back up. "Took the ridge trail, longer, but passable." "You could have died." "So could you." He said it flatly, without drama, and somehow that made it worse. Elena sank into a chair. "I'm an idiot." "You're inexperienced. There's a difference." He finished with the stove, then started unpacking the food. Salted meat, beans, flour, coffee. "Margaret sent extra. She figured you'd be low." "I can't keep relying on other people to save me. Everyone relies on someone out here. That's how it works." He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "You did fine, Elena. You just didn't know what you didn't know. Now you do. Next winter, you'll be ready." "Next winter. You think I'll last that long?" "Yeah, I do." The certainty in his voice steadied her. She wanted to ask why he believed in her when she barely believed in herself. Wanted to ask why he'd risked the ridge trail, why he'd come at all when he could have waited for the storm to pass. But the questions felt too big for the small room. "Stay," she said instead. "Until the storm passes. It's too dangerous to go back tonight." Caleb hesitated. "I can sleep in the schoolroom." "Don't be stupid. It's colder there than here." She gestured to the bed, then the floor. "Same arrangement as before. I'll take the bed. You take the floor." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the wind howled again, and practicality won out. "All right." They fell into the old rhythm easily. Caleb cooked, simple food, but warm and filling. Elena found blankets for his palate. They ate in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside while the stove kept them warm inside. Later, lying in the dark, listening to Caleb's steady breathing from the floor, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. Not just physically safe, but safe in a deeper way, like she could drop her guard, like she didn't have to be strong every moment. "Caleb?" she whispered. "Yeah?" "Why did you really come? Margaret could have sent someone else." A long pause. Then, "Because I wanted to make sure you were all right." "Why? Does it matter?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know," he finally said, "but it does. It matters." Elena closed her eyes, heart pounding. She didn't say anything else, neither did he. But something had shifted again, something neither of them could take back. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of close quarters, of sharing space, of conversations that meandered from teaching to ranching to books to nothing at all. 3 days of Elena learning that Caleb read poetry, that he'd been engaged once before the war, that he'd lost his best friend to Apache raiders and still had nightmares about it. 3 days of Caleb learning that Elena missed music more than anything, that she'd wanted to be a doctor like her father, but women weren't allowed, that she sometimes woke up thinking she was back in the desert, and it took minutes to remember she was safe. 3 days of them circling around the thing they both felt but couldn't name. When the storm finally broke and Caleb prepared to leave, Elena walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You already thanked me." "I know. I'm doing it again." He smiled. Actually smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Stay safe, Elena." "You too." He mounted horse and rode off, and Elena stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Her cheeks still tingled where he'd touched her. That night, alone again, she finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling for him, and she had no idea what to do about it. Spring came late that year, reluctant and half-hearted. The snow melted in patches, turning the roads to mud that sucked at wagon wheels and horse hooves. Elena's students returned one by one, some of them different after the long winter, taller, quieter. Tommy had lost his father to pneumonia. Lucy's family had nearly starved when their supplies ran low. Sam had taken over most of the ranch work while his father recovered from a broken leg. They didn't talk about it much. Out here, hardship wasn't special. It was just winter. Elena had made it through her 3-month trial. Brigg extended her contract indefinitely, raised her pay to $25 a month, and told her she was doing better than any teacher they'd had in 5 years. She should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, she felt restless. The problem was Caleb, or rather, the problem was that Caleb had become a problem without either of them acknowledging it. He still came every Friday, still sat beside her at dinner, still checked on her with that same quiet concern. But something had changed after the storm. The air between them felt charged now, heavy with things unsaid. They were careful not to touch, careful not to look at each other too long, careful in a way that made the wanting worse. Elena tried to ignore it, threw herself into teaching, into improving the school, into becoming indispensable to Red Mesa. She organized a reading circle for the older students, started a small lending library with books donated by Margaret and a few other ranch families, began teaching evening classes for adults who'd never learned to read. It worked, mostly. During the day, she was too busy to think about Caleb's hands or his rare smiles or the way he said her name. But at night, alone in her quarters, her mind wandered places it shouldn't. She was 23 years old. She'd never been courted, never been kissed, never let herself want anything beyond survival and respectability. Her aunt had made it clear that Elena's prospects were limited. Plain face, no dowry, uncertain lineage. The best she could hope for was a practical arrangement with a practical man. But Caleb wasn't practical, or maybe he was too practical. Either way, he made her feel things that had nothing to do with practicality. And she had no idea if he felt the same. March brought unexpected visitors. Elena was in the middle of a geography lesson when the door opened and Walter Brigg walked in, followed by a man she'd never seen before. Tall, well-dressed in a way that stood out in Red Mesa, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that came from money and authority. "Miss Whitmore," Brigg said. "Sorry to interrupt. This is Lawrence Hartwell." The name hit her like cold water. Hartwell. The family in Phoenix. The governess position she'd never reached. "Mr. Hartwell," she managed, aware of 12 pairs of student eyes watching. "Children, please continue reading Chapter 3. I'll be just outside." She followed the men onto the porch, her heart hammering. Hartwell studied her with sharp blue eyes. "Miss Whitmore, I've been looking for you for quite some time." "I'm sorry, the stagecoach was attacked and I know. I spoke with the marshal. He said there were no survivors. There were 7 of us initially. I don't know about the others. 2 made it to settlements. 3 didn't. You were presumed dead." He paused. "Until I made inquiries in Red Mesa and learned there was a new teacher, a young woman who'd arrived under unusual circumstances." Elena felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. "I couldn't contact you. I lost everything in the attack. I didn't even have money for a telegram." "I understand, and I'm not here to reproach you." He glanced at Brigg, then back to her. "I'm here to offer you the position again. We still need a governess. My wife and I have 3 children who require education, and we've been unable to find someone suitable. Your credentials are excellent, and despite the circumstances, I believe you would be an asset to our household." It was everything she had wanted 6 months ago. Stability, respectability. A future that didn't involve one-room schoolhouses and winters that nearly killed her. "The salary is $40 a month," Hartwell continued. "Room and board provided, of course. Phoenix is growing rapidly. There are opportunities there. Society, culture. A young woman of your intelligence could do well." $40. Nearly double what she made now. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it." He pulled a card from his pocket, handed it to her. "I'm staying in Red Mesa for 2 days. The ranch on the edge of town, the Henderson place. Send word when you've decided." He tipped his hat and left, Brigg trailing after him with an unreadable expression. Elena stood on the porch, the card clutched in her hand, and felt the world tilt. That afternoon, she taught on autopilot. The children sensed her distraction but didn't comment. When the last one left, she sat at her desk and stared at Hartwell's card until the words blurred. $40 a month. Phoenix. A real future. Everything she'd thought she wanted. So why did it feel like a trap? She was still sitting there when Caleb appeared in the doorway. It wasn't Friday. He shouldn't be here. "Heard you had a visitor," he said. News traveled fast in small towns. Lawrence Hartwell, the family I was supposed to work for. She set down the card. "He offered me the position again." Caleb went very still. "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." She looked up at him. "It's good money, Caleb. More than I make here. And Phoenix? There are opportunities there. I could save money, maybe eventually open my own school, or study medicine. I always wanted to study medicine." "That's not what I asked." "Then what are you asking?" He crossed the room, stopped in front of her desk. "Are you going to take it?" "Why does it matter to you?" "It matters." That's not an answer. They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. "You want to go?" Caleb finally said, his voice rough. "Then go. I'm not going to stop you." "I didn't say I wanted to go. I said I don't know." "Sounds like you do know. You're just afraid to admit it." The accusation stung because it was partially true, but only partially. "What do you want me to say, Caleb? That I'll stay here for $25 a month, teaching children who might not even show up half the time, living in a glorified closet, spending my winters hoping I don't freeze to death? That's not a life, that's just existing. And Phoenix is better? Playing nursemaid to some rich man's children, living under someone else's roof, following someone else's rules? His jaw was tight. At least here you're building something. You matter here. I'd matter there too. As what? A servant with a fancy title? That's not fair. Life's not fair. You should know that by now. Elena stood, anger flaring hot in her chest. Why are you being like this? Like what? Like you have a say in what I do. Like you... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Like I what? He stepped closer. Say it. Like you care. I do care. As what? A friend? Someone who feels obligated because you saved my life? She was shaking now, months of careful restraint fracturing. Tell me what this is, Caleb. Tell me why you come here every Friday, why you check on me, why you rode through a blizzard to make sure I had firewood. Tell me what I am to you. He looked at her for a long moment, something warring in his expression. Then he turned and walked out. Elena stood frozen, fury and hurt and confusion tangling inside her. She wanted to throw something, wanted to scream, wanted to run after him and demand an answer. Instead, she sat back down and put her head in her hands. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying the argument over and over, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong, what she should have said differently, what he'd meant. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She found Hartwell at the Henderson place, taking his morning coffee on the porch. Mr. Hartwell, I've considered your offer. He set down his cup. And? I need to finish the school term. I have obligations here, but after that, she took a breath. After that, I accept. Relief crossed his face. Excellent. The term ends in June, correct? Yes? Then plan to arrive in Phoenix by July 1st. I'll send a wagon for you, proper escort this time, no stagecoaches. He smiled. My wife will be delighted. She's been managing the children's education herself, and frankly, she's at her wit's end. They discussed details, what she should bring, what would be provided, the daily schedule. It all sounded reasonable, civilized, like the life she'd imagined for herself before the desert changed everything. So why did she feel like she was making a terrible mistake? She told Brigg that afternoon. He took it better than she'd expected. Can't say I'm surprised, he said. You're too smart for Red Mesa. Always knew you'd move on eventually. It's not about being too smart. No false modesty. You're wasted here, and we both know it. He leaned back in his chair. But you've given these kids something they needed, shown them that learning matters. That's worth more than you know. I'll finish the term. Find a replacement if I can. Appreciate that. He paused. Does Caleb know? The question felt loaded. I imagine he'll hear. You might want to tell him yourself before he hears it from someone else. But Elena couldn't face Caleb. Not yet. Not with everything still raw from their fight. She threw herself into the final months of teaching with almost manic energy, pushed her students harder, demanded more from them, drove herself to exhaustion every day so she wouldn't have to think about what came after. Lucy could read full sentences now. Sam had grasped fractions. Tommy spoke up regularly in class, his voice growing stronger each week. They were all growing, changing, becoming, and she was leaving them. The guilt gnawed at her. She'd promised she wouldn't give up on them, promised she'd stay. And now she was breaking that promise for money and opportunity and a future that felt increasingly hollow the closer it came. Caleb didn't come the next Friday, or the one after that. Margaret mentioned casually over dinner that Caleb had taken on extra work, riding fence lines in the far pastures, staying out for days at a time. She said it neutrally, but her eyes were knowing. He was avoiding her. Elena told herself it didn't matter, told herself she'd made the right choice, told herself a lot of things she didn't quite believe. May arrived with wildflowers and wind. The school term was winding down. Elena had found a replacement, a young man from Tucson, earnest and eager, probably better suited to the work than she'd ever been. He'd start in September. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt like she was walking toward a cliff edge. 2 weeks before term ended, Margaret invited her to the ranch house for tea. Just the two of them, which was unusual. The Friday dinners were communal, loud. This was intimate, deliberate. They sat on the porch, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen. You're really leaving, Margaret said. Not a question. Yes. And Caleb knows? Elena's hands tightened on her teacup. I assume someone told him. He knows. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something personal? I suppose. Do you love him? The question landed like a physical blow. Margaret, I don't. We're not. That's not an answer. Elena set down her cup before she dropped it. It doesn't matter what I feel. He's made it clear he doesn't want whatever this is. Has he? Or have you both been too scared to say what you actually want? He walked out on me. When I asked him to tell me what I meant to him, he walked out. Because he's a coward, Margaret said bluntly. Bravest man I know in every way except one. Put him in front of a charging bull, he won't flinch. Ask him to talk about his feelings, he runs like the devil's chasing him. She reached over, put her hand on Elena's. But that doesn't mean he doesn't feel them. It doesn't matter. I'm leaving. Why? Because it's a better opportunity, better money, a better life. Is it? Margaret's voice was gentle. Or is it just safer? Elena felt something crack in her chest. What am I supposed to do, Margaret? Wait around hoping he'll figure out how to talk to me? Build a life around someone who can't even admit he cares? No. You're supposed to decide what you actually want, not what's sensible or practical or safe. What you want. Margaret squeezed her hand. Life's too short to spend it settling, honey. Trust me. I almost married a banker in St. Louis because it made sense. Thank the stars I came to my senses and married Walter instead. We've had 40 years together, and not one of them has been sensible. But they've been real. Elena's eyes stung. I don't know if I'm brave enough for real. You survived the desert. You're brave enough. That night, Elena lay awake again, Margaret's words circling through her mind. What did she actually want? She wanted to matter, wanted to build something lasting, wanted to wake up every day with purpose instead of just obligation. She had that here. The students, the school, the community. She'd built all of it from nothing. But she also wanted, and this was the terrifying part, she wanted Caleb. Wanted his rare smiles and his steady presence and the way he made her feel seen. Wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen by someone, not out of obligation or practicality, but because they couldn't imagine life without her. But wanting wasn't enough. Not if he didn't want the same thing. 1 week before term ended, Caleb finally showed up. It was late afternoon, students long gone, Elena packing up her classroom. She heard boots on the porch and knew, somehow, it was him. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Can I come in? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He entered slowly, looking around the classroom like he was seeing it for the first time. The children's drawings on the wall, the books she'd collected, the slate board with tomorrow's lesson already written out. I heard you're leaving, he said finally. Yes. July 1st? Yes. He turned to face her. I came to apologize. For walking out, for not… He stopped, jaw working. For not saying what I should have said. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear him over it. What should you have said? That you scare the hell out of me. It wasn't what she'd expected. What? You scare me, Elena. The way I feel about you, the way I think about you all the time. The way I rode through that storm because the thought of you alone and cold made me half crazy. He took a step closer. I've spent 10 years keeping everyone at arm's length, telling myself it's easier that way, safer. And then you show up, half dead in the sand, and everything I'd convinced myself I didn't need, didn't want, it all came back. Caleb, I'm not done. His voice was rough. I told myself you deserved better. Someone with more to offer. Someone who wasn't just a broken-down cowboy living in the middle of nowhere. I told myself when Hartwell showed up, it was a sign. That I should let you go. That I should want you to go because it was better for you. And do you? Want me to go? No. The word came out harsh. I don't want you to go. I want you to stay. I want Friday dinners and arguments about books and watching you teach those kids like you're changing the world. I want… He stopped, swallowed hard. I want you, Elena. Have since the day you woke up in my cabin and tried to thank me for saving your life like you didn't understand you'd already saved mine. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and irrevocable. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of 6 months of wanting crash over her all at once. Why didn't you say something? She whispered. Because I'm a coward. Margaret's right about that. He smiled, bitter and self-aware. But I'm saying it now, even if it's too late, even if you've already decided. You asked me what you are to me, and I walked out because I couldn't face the answer. But the answer is everything. You're everything. Her vision blurred. I haven't accepted the position yet, not officially. Hope flared in his eyes. What? I told Hartwell I would, but I haven't signed anything, haven't taken any money. She stepped closer. I was going to. I was leaving in 2 weeks, and I was going to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to stay. You don't have to stay for me. If Phoenix is what you want, it's not. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. It's not what I want. I thought it was. I thought I needed more money, more opportunity, more everything. But what I actually need is right here. The school, the kids, the community. She paused. You. Elena, I'm not done. She used his words back on him, saw him almost smile. I want Friday dinners too, and arguments about books. I want to wake up and know you're going to check on me even though you don't have to. I want to build something here, something that matters. And I want, her voice caught, I want to build it with you. If you want that too. I want that. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. I want all of it. Then stay. I'm not the one leaving. Stay anyway, right now. Don't go anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and then he was kissing her. It wasn't gentle or practiced or anything like the romantic moments she'd read about in books. It was desperate and clumsy and perfect, his hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, both of them trying to close 6 months of distance in a single moment. When they finally broke apart, Elena was shaking. I've never, she started. I know. How do you know? Because I pay attention. He rested his forehead against hers. And because you kiss like someone who's been waiting their whole life to start. She laughed, the sound watery. I have been. Then we'll figure it out together. You're sure about this? About me? I've never been more sure of anything. He pulled back slightly, looked at her seriously. But Elena, I need you to be sure too. I'm not offering you Phoenix. I'm offering you Red Mesa and a cowboy with no prospects and a life that's going to be hard more often than it's easy. I don't want Phoenix. I want hard. I want real. She smiled through tears. I want you. He kissed her again, softer this time, and Elena felt something fundamental settle into place, like she'd been walking toward this moment since the desert, since Caleb had found her in the sand and chosen to fight death for a stranger. They'd both been fighting ever since, fighting the desert, fighting winter, fighting their own fear. Maybe it was time to stop fighting and start building instead. When they finally left the schoolhouse, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Caleb kept her hand in his as they walked, neither of them speaking, just being. I need to tell Hartwell, Elena said finally. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know, I'm coming anyway. They found Hartwell at the Henderson place again, preparing to leave the next morning. Mr. Hartwell, I'm sorry, I can't accept your position. He looked between her and Caleb, their joined hands, and understanding crossed his face. I see. I found someone else to take it. A young man from Tucson. His credentials are better than mine, and he's eager to start. Then I suppose I should thank you for finding a replacement. Hartwell smiled slightly. Though I suspect my wife will be disappointed. She was looking forward to having another woman in the house. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're choosing what you want. That's admirable. He tipped his hat. Good luck to you both. As he rode away, Elena leaned into Caleb's side. Think I made the right choice? Don't know. Ask me in 50 years. She laughed. 50 years? At least. He turned to face her, serious now. I meant what I said, Elena. I'm in this, all of it, for as long as you'll have me. Then you better get used to Red Mesa, because I'm not going anywhere. Good, he said, and kissed her again right there in the street, not caring who saw. And Elena kissed him back, tasting possibility and promise and a future they'd build together, one hard day at a time. The town found out before morning. Elena woke to knocking on her door, Margaret standing there with a basket of fresh bread and a knowing smile that said she'd already heard everything. Took you too long enough, was all she said before pulling Elena into a hug. By noon, half of Red Mesa had made excuses to walk past the school. Mrs. Henderson brought preserves. The blacksmith's wife offered to alter one of her own dresses for Elena. Mr. Foster extended more credit at the general store, winking like he was in on some grand conspiracy. Small towns didn't keep secrets, but they did take care of their own. Caleb endured the attention with his usual stoic grace, which meant he mostly grunted and changed the subject whenever someone congratulated him. But Elena caught him smiling when he thought no one was looking, and that was enough. The week before school ended, they sat on the porch of her quarters after sunset, sharing a bottle of whiskey Walter had given them with a gruff, "Don't do anything stupid." The stars were out in force, the desert air cooling rapidly the way it always did once the sun disappeared. "We should talk about what happens next," Elena said. Caleb took a sip, passed her the bottle. "Yeah. Very eloquent. I'm thinking. Think out loud." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I've got some money saved. Not much, but enough. Been living cheap for 10 years, sending most of my pay back into savings. Figured someday I'd buy land, start my own place." He looked at her. "That someday could be now, if you wanted." Elena's heart kicked up. "Your own ranch. Small one. There's a section of land about 15 miles northeast near the base of the mountains. Good water, decent grazing. Owner died last year. His son wants to sell. Walter said he'd loan me the rest if I needed it." "You've been planning this." "For a while, yeah. Just never had a reason to pull the trigger." He took the bottle back, didn't drink, just held it. "But if we're doing this, building something together, I want it to be ours, not working someone else's land, not living in someone else's space." "What about the school? The students?" "School's in Red Mesa. Land I'm looking at is close enough you could ride in most days. Maybe not in winter, but we'd figure it out." He paused. "Unless you want to stay in town." "We could do that too. I could keep working for Walter. We could—" "No." Elena surprised herself with the certainty. "No, I want what you're describing. Land. A home we build. Something that's ours. It won't be easy. Starting a ranch from nothing, I know. Hard more often than easy." She smiled. "You warned me already. Just making sure you know what you're signing up for." "I survived the desert, Caleb. I think I can handle a ranch." He laughed, short and rough. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence, passing the bottle back and forth, until Elena asked the question that had been nagging at her. "When do you want to get married?" Caleb went very still. "I haven't asked you yet." "You implied it pretty heavily." "Implying's not the same as asking." "Then ask." He set down the bottle, turned to face her fully. His expression was serious, almost nervous, and Elena realized this mattered to him more than he was letting on. "Elena Whitmore, will you marry me?" It wasn't romantic, no grand gesture, no ring, no carefully rehearsed speech, just a man asking a question in the dark, hoping for the right answer. "Yes," she said simply. Relief flooded his face. "Yeah?" "Yes. I'll marry you." He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and Elena thought maybe simple was better than grand anyway. Maybe the truth of it mattered more than the trappings. When they broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Soon," he said. "I want to marry you soon, before I lose my nerve or you come to your senses." "I'm not going to come to my senses." "You say that now." "I mean it now." She pulled back to look at him. "How soon is soon?" "End of summer. That gives us time to buy the land, start building. We could have the wedding at the ranch house. Margaret would love that." "End of summer," Elena repeated, testing the words. 3 months. 3 months, and her entire life would change. "All right. End of summer." They told Walter and Margaret the next day. Margaret immediately started planning, rattling off lists of things that needed to be done, people who needed to be invited, food that needed to be prepared. Walter just clapped Caleb on the shoulder and said, "About damn time." The land purchase went through faster than expected. The seller was eager to be done with it, and Walter's endorsement carried weight. By mid-June, Caleb owned 40 acres of rough country with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains that made Elena's chest ache every time she saw it. "We'll build here," Caleb said, standing on a slight rise that overlooked the whole property. "House facing east to catch the morning sun. Barn over there near the water, corral between them. Elena could see it, could picture the life they'd build in this empty space. It felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. When do we start? Now. He wasn't exaggerating. The next weeks became a blur of construction. Caleb called in favors from every ranch hand he'd ever worked with, and suddenly they had a crew. Men showed up at dawn with tools and materials, worked until dusk, accepted payment in meals and whiskey. Margaret coordinated food, turning the building site into something like a party most evenings. Elena helped where she could, though she was more hindrance than help at first. She'd never built anything in her life. But she learned to mix mortar, to hammer nails straight, to measure twice and cut once. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached. She'd never been happier. The schoolhouse sat empty now, term officially over. The young man from Tucson would arrive in August to prepare for the fall session. Elena should have felt sad about leaving it behind. Instead, she felt like she was shedding an old skin, becoming something new. The house took shape slowly, adobe walls rising from the earth, thick enough to keep out summer heat and winter cold. A real roof, not thatch, but proper shingles. Glass windows that Caleb ordered special from Phoenix, an extravagance that made Elena protest until he said, "You're going to want to see the mountains from inside, trust me." He was right. When the windows were installed and she stood in what would be their bedroom, looking out at the peaks turning gold in the sunset, she understood. This was home. Not the building, not the land, but the choice. The deliberate construction of something that belonged to them and no one else. They married on the last Saturday in August. Margaret had wanted something elaborate, but Elena and Caleb had vetoed that hard. Simple ceremony, just family and close friends, at the new house. The structure was finished enough to be habitable, even if half the rooms were still empty. Elena wore a dress Margaret had made, simple cotton dyed deep blue. No veil, no elaborate hairdo, just herself. Caleb wore a new shirt, his good pants, boots polished for maybe the first time ever. He looked uncomfortable and perfect. The circuit judge performed the ceremony on the porch. The sun setting behind them, 30 people gathered on the land they'd built. Walter stood up as Caleb's witness. Margaret stood up as Elena's. The vows were traditional, short. Elena's voice shook slightly when she said, "I do," but Caleb's hand in hers was steady. When the judge pronounced them married, Caleb kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. The crowd whooped and hollered, and someone started playing a fiddle, and suddenly there was music and dancing and more food than 30 people could possibly eat. Elena danced with Caleb first, then Walter, then half a dozen ranch hands who were surprisingly light on their feet. She danced with Lucy, who'd come with her mother and was wearing her best dress. She danced with Sam, who blushed the whole time. She even danced with Tommy, who'd grown 3 inches over the summer and was suddenly almost as tall as her. As the night wore on and people started drifting toward home, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the porch, watching the last of them go. Caleb came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted. Want them all to leave so we can have our house to ourselves?" "Little bit." He laughed quietly against her hair. "Margaret's already herding them out. Give it 10 minutes. It took 15, but finally the last wagon rolled away, taking Margaret and Walter with it. The house fell silent except for the crackle of the dying fire someone had built in the yard. Elena and Caleb stood on their porch, looking out at their land, and the weight of it hit her all at once. They were married. They owned this place. They were building a life. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I'm terrified." "Yeah?" "Completely terrified. What if I'm terrible at this? At being married, running a ranch, all of it?" "Then you'll be terrible at it, and we'll figure it out anyway." He turned her to face him. "Elena, you were half dead in the desert 6 months ago. Everything since then has been you figuring it out as you go. This isn't different. It feels different, because the stakes are higher. But you're not alone in it. That's the whole point." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We figure it out together. That's what marriage is. Just 2 people trying not to mess it up too badly." She laughed despite herself. "That's your idea of romance?" "That's my idea of truth. Romance is easy, truth is harder." "I hate that you're right. You'll get used to it." She kissed him, pulling him close, and felt the fear ease slightly. He was right. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Later, lying in bed in their room with the mountain view Caleb had promised, Elena stared at the ceiling and listened to her husband, breathing beside her. "You awake?" she whispered. "Yeah, I'm happy." He rolled to face her. "Yeah?" Terrified, but happy. She smiled in the darkness. "Is that normal? I don't know. I've never done this before either." He pulled her closer. "But I'm happy too, and terrified. So maybe that's just what this is." They fell asleep tangled together, and Elena dreamed of mountains and wide open spaces and a future that stretched out ahead of them, uncertain but theirs. The next months were a crash course in ranch life. Caleb bought cattle. Not many, just 20 head to start. Elena learned to ride properly, not the gentle ambling she'd done before, but real riding. Learned to check fences, to spot a lame animal, to tell when the water level in the creek was dropping too low. She kept teaching, riding into Red Mesa 3 days a week to work with students who needed extra help. The new teacher, Mr. Carson, was competent but overwhelmed. Elena found herself mentoring him without meaning to, sharing lessons that worked, warning him about parents who needed careful handling. It felt good, like she was still part of something beyond the ranch. But the ranch demanded more of her attention as fall turned to winter. They needed to prepare, stock supplies, reinforce the barn, make sure they had enough feed for the cattle. Elena remembered her first winter in Red Mesa, how unprepared she'd been. She wasn't making that mistake twice. Caleb worked from before dawn until after dark most days. Elena worked alongside him when she could, did the cooking and mending when she couldn't. It was exhausting, endless. Some nights they were too tired to do more than eat and collapse into bed. But there were good moments too. Sunday mornings when they slept late and had leisurely breakfast. Evenings when the work was done early and they sat on the porch watching the sun set. The day Caleb came in with a Mustang he'd found running wild and spent weeks gentling her until Elena could ride her. They fought sometimes. Stupid fights about nothing. Where to store the grain, whether they needed a new plow, how to handle a difficult cow. Elena had a temper she hadn't known she had. Caleb could go silent and withdrawn when he was upset, shutting her out completely. They learned to fight better, learned when to push and when to back off, learned that "I need space" was valid and "talk to me" was valid, and sometimes they needed different things at the same time, and that was fine. Marriage, Elena discovered, was less like the romance novels Margaret secretly loaned her, and more like building a house. You laid a foundation, then you built on it, and sometimes you had to tear down a wall and start over, but the foundation held if you'd built it right. Their foundation held. Winter came hard again, but they were ready this time. Snowed in for 3 weeks straight in January, but they had supplies. Elena taught Caleb to play chess with a set Walter had given them as a wedding present. Caleb taught Elena to carve wood, and she made terrible lopsided spoons that they used anyway. When the snow finally melted and they could get to town again, Margaret took one look at Elena and knew. "You're pregnant." Elena froze. "What? No, I mean, how did you... "You've got the look. Trust me, I had 4 babies. I know the look." Margaret's smile was warm. "Does Caleb know?" "I don't know. I wasn't sure." Elena sat down heavily. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but suspecting and confirming were different things. "You need to tell him." "I know. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not ready? What if... Elena." Margaret took her hands. "You're going to be fine. Caleb's going to be fine. And yes, things might go wrong because things always might go wrong, but they also might go right. You can't live in fear of the might." Elena told Caleb that night, blurting it out over dinner before she lost her nerve. "I'm pregnant." He dropped his fork, just stared at her. "Say something," Elena said. "When?" "I don't know exactly. Fall, probably. September or October." "You're sure?" "Pretty sure." Margaret knew just by looking at me. He stood abruptly, and for one terrible moment, Elena thought he was going to walk out like he had that day in the schoolhouse. But instead, he came around the table, pulled her to her feet, and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby," he said against her hair. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother." Guess we'll figure it out together. Guess so. He pulled back, looked at her seriously. You're terrified. Completely. Me too. But happy? Yeah, happy. He kissed her forehead. Terrified, but happy. Elena laughed, and it came out shaky, but real. That seems to be our specialty. Pregnancy was harder than Elena expected. She'd known about morning sickness. Every woman knew about morning sickness. But she hadn't expected it to last all day, for weeks on end. Hadn't expected the exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible. Hadn't expected to cry over nothing, to snap at Caleb for breathing too loud, to feel like her body was betraying her. Caleb handled it with patience that surprised her. Took over more of the work without complaining. Held her hair when she was sick. Rubbed her back when it ached. Never once made her feel weak for struggling. By spring, the worst of it passed. She started showing, her body changing in ways that fascinated and terrified her. Margaret gave her maternity dresses, shared advice, promised to be there when the time came. The ranch kept demanding attention. They hired a hand, a young Mexican man named Javier, who knew cattle better than anyone Caleb had ever met. It helped. Gave Caleb breathing room to handle Elena's bad days without the ranch falling apart. Summer arrived with brutal heat. Elena, 7 months pregnant and miserable, spent most days in the house, too swollen and uncomfortable to do much. She tried to help with lighter work, but even that exhausted her. I'm useless, she complained one evening. You're growing a human, Caleb said. That's not useless. I should be doing more. You're doing enough. He put his hand on her belly, felt the baby kick, still marveled at it every time. More than enough. In late September, 3 weeks before the baby was supposed to come, Elena's water broke during breakfast. She looked down at the puddle on the floor, then up at Caleb. I think it's time. He went pale. Now? But you said, babies don't care what I said. Another contraction hit, and she gripped the table. Get Margaret. The next hours blurred into pain and effort, and Margaret's calm voice telling her what to do. Caleb stayed, even when Margaret suggested he might want to wait outside. He held Elena's hand, let her squeeze until she thought she'd break his fingers, didn't flinch when she screamed. The baby, a girl, tiny and red and furious, was born just after sunset. Margaret cleaned her up, wrapped her in a blanket, placed her in Elena's arms. Elena looked down at this impossible creature, this person she and Caleb had made, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. All the fear, all the doubt, all the wondering if she was ready. It didn't matter. Ready or not, this was her daughter. She needs a name, Margaret said gently. Elena looked at Caleb. They'd discussed names, couldn't agree on any. But looking at her now, Elena knew. Sarah, she said, after my mother. Caleb's eyes were wet. Sarah Rourke. Sarah Rourke, Elena repeated, and the baby made a small sound, like she approved. Margaret left them alone after checking one more time that everything was fine. Caleb climbed carefully onto the bed beside Elena, and they sat there together, staring at their daughter. We made a person, Caleb said. We did. I have no idea what to do with her. Neither do I. Sarah squirmed in Elena's arms, made another small noise. Elena adjusted her hold, and the baby settled, tiny fist curling around Elena's finger. I think she's going to be stubborn, Caleb observed. She's our daughter. Of course she's going to be stubborn. Fair point. They sat in the quiet, the house dark except for the lamp beside the bed, and Elena thought about the journey that had led here, the desert, the near death, the slow rebuilding of her life, the choice to stay, the choice to love this difficult, quiet man beside her. Every choice had led to this moment, this baby, this future. Thank you, she said. Caleb looked at her. For what? For finding me, for fighting for me, for all of it. Elena. His voice was rough. You fought harder than anyone. You survived. You built this life. I just got to be part of it. We built it together. Yeah, he said, pulling her closer, careful of the baby between them. We did. Sarah started to fuss, and Elena tried to soothe her, feeling clumsy and uncertain. But Caleb helped, his large hands surprisingly gentle, and together they figured out what she needed. Together. The way they'd figure out everything else that came next. The desert had tried to take everything from Elena, had stripped her down to nothing, left her dying in the sand. But she'd survived, and in surviving, she'd found something she'd never had before. A home, a family, a life worth fighting for. Outside, the desert stretched on endlessly, vast and indifferent, but inside, in this house they'd built with their own hands, there was warmth, there was love, there was a future neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. And that, Elena thought as Sarah finally fell asleep in her arms, that was everything. The first year with Sarah was chaos dressed up as routine. Elena had read books about motherhood, listened to Margaret's advice, thought she'd prepared herself. But nothing prepared you for the reality of a screaming infant at 2 a.m. when you'd only slept 3 hours in the past 2 days. Nothing prepared you for the bone-deep exhaustion, the constant fear that you were doing everything wrong, the way time simultaneously crawled and flew. Caleb was better with the baby than Elena expected. He'd hold Sarah against his chest while doing paperwork, his large hand spanning her entire back. He'd walk her around the property when she was fussy, pointing out cattle and horses like she could understand. Once, Elena found him reading Paradise Lost to her, his voice low and steady, Sarah's eyes tracking his face like he was telling her the secrets of the universe. "She doesn't understand a word you're saying," Elena had said. "Doesn't matter, she likes the sound." And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Sarah would settle for Caleb when she wouldn't settle for anyone else. It should have made Elena feel inadequate. Instead, it made her love him more. This hard man who'd spent 10 years alone had become someone who could soothe a colicky baby with Milton. The ranch grew slowly. They added more cattle, built a better barn, hired another hand. Money was tight, tighter than Elena had ever experienced. But they managed. Caleb was careful with every dollar, and Elena learned to be creative with meals, with repairs, with making things last. She went back to teaching when Sarah was 6 months old, taking the baby with her. It wasn't ideal. Half the lessons were interrupted by crying or feeding, but Mr. Carson had quit after one disastrous year, and Red Mesa needed a teacher. So Elena strapped Sarah to her back and taught arithmetic and reading while her daughter babbled nonsense and pulled her hair. The students loved it. Lucy, now 12 and reading at an advanced level, would hold Sarah during recess. Sam helped Elena carry supplies. Tommy, almost 15 and suddenly serious about his education, would do his homework while keeping an eye on the baby. It wasn't what Elena had imagined teaching would look like. But it worked. When Sarah was 2, Elena got pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect. The sickness, the exhaustion, the way her body would rebel before accepting what was happening. It didn't make it easier, but it made it less terrifying. The second baby, a boy they named James after Caleb's father, came fast. Too fast. Elena barely made it to the bed before he arrived, Margaret rushing in just in time to catch him. Caleb missed the birth entirely, out checking on a sick cow, and came home to find he had a son. "You couldn't wait?" he asked, holding James with the same careful reverence he'd shown Sarah. He had other plans. 2 children under 3. The house that had seemed spacious suddenly felt cramped. Elena and Caleb added a room, then another. The ranch kept expanding. More land purchased from a neighbor, more cattle, eventually a few horses to sell. They hired Javier's brother, Miguel, and his wife, Rosa, who helped with the house and the children. Rosa became essential, taking care of James and Sarah when Elena taught, handling the endless cooking and cleaning that came with a working ranch. Elena felt guilty about it at first. She should be able to do everything, be a mother, a teacher, a rancher's wife. Should be able to manage without help. "That's stupid," Margaret said bluntly when Elena confessed this. "You think I raised 4 children and ran Walter's household without help? Nobody does this alone. That's not strength, that's martyrdom, and martyrdom's just pride dressed up as sacrifice." It was the wake-up call Elena needed. She stopped trying to be perfect and focused on being present instead. Present for her children, for her students, for Caleb. Present for the life they were building, messy and imperfect as it was. Years folded into each other. Sarah started school, in her mother's classroom, which was both wonderful and terrible. James learned to walk, then run, then climb everything in sight. A third baby came, another girl they named Catherine, who was colicky and stubborn and utterly convinced the world revolved around her. The ranch prospered, slowly, incrementally, but real. Caleb's reputation grew. He was known for fair dealing, good stock, and knowing cattle better than anyone in 3 counties. People started coming to him for advice, and eventually he was elected to the Territorial Cattlemen's Association. Elena watched him grow into this role with quiet pride. The man who'd spent 10 years alone, who'd been convinced he had nothing to offer, was becoming a leader. Not through force or charisma, but through competence and integrity. She grew too. Her school expanded. They built an addition, hired another teacher to handle the younger students, while Elena focused on the older ones. She started teaching advanced subjects, preparing students for university. Several of her students went on to college, including Lucy, who became a teacher herself, and Sam, who studied engineering. But success came with complications. When Sarah was 8 and already reading at a level that surpassed most adults in Red Mesa, a man from the Territorial Education Board visited the school. He watched Elena teach for a week, then made an offer. "We're establishing a normal school in Phoenix, teacher training. We need someone to run the women's program." He adjusted his spectacles. "You'd be perfect. Salary of $80 a month, housing provided, opportunity to shape education across the territory." Elena thanked him politely and said she'd consider it. She didn't tell Caleb immediately, carried it around for 3 days, turning it over in her mind. $80 a month was more than she and Caleb made combined from the ranch and her teaching. It would change everything, but it would also mean leaving, moving to Phoenix, taking the children, disrupting the life they'd built. On the 3rd night, she finally brought it up over dinner. The children were in bed, the house quiet. "I got an offer from the Territorial Education Board." Caleb's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of offer?" She explained. Watched his face stay carefully neutral while she talked. When she finished, he set down his fork. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd consider it." "Do you want to go?" "I don't know." She met his eyes. "Part of me does. It's a huge opportunity, Caleb. I could help train teachers, improve education across the territory, make a real difference." "You make a real difference here." "I know. But there's a difference between teaching 20 students and shaping policy for hundreds of schools." "True." He was quiet for a long moment. "What does the other part of you want? The part that's not sure?" "The other part wants to stay here, in this house we built, on this land we fought for, raising our children where they can run wild and learn from the desert instead of being trapped in a city." "Those are both good reasons." "I know. That's the problem." Caleb pushed back from the table, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness, at the land he knew by heart. "You remember when Hartwell offered you that position in Phoenix, back when we were barely talking to each other?" "Of course. I was terrified you'd take it. Convinced myself I had to let you go because it was better for you. Spent weeks in knots about it." He turned to face her. "But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of asking you to stay. Scared of what it meant if you chose me over something better. This is different. We're married. We have children. It's not that different." He came back to the table, sat down across from her. "You're still choosing between what you want and what you think you should want, between obligation and opportunity." "What do you think I should do?" "That's not my call to make." "Caleb, no, listen." He reached across the table, took her hand. 10 years ago, I would have told you what to do. Would have made it about me, about us, about keeping things stable. But I've learned something since then. You're not happy unless you're building something. And if you're not building something that challenges you, that pushes you, you'll wither. I've watched it happen to too many women out here. Smart women who get swallowed up by housework and children and lose themselves. I haven't lost myself. Not yet. But you're restless. I can see it. Same way you were restless before you started teaching. He squeezed her hand. "So here's what I think. I think you should do whatever will make you look back in 30 years without regrets. If that's Phoenix, we'll figure it out. If it's staying here, we'll figure that out too. But don't choose based on what you think I want or what you think you should want. Choose based on what's actually true." Elena's eyes burned. "What if I make the wrong choice?" "Then you'll make a different choice later. Nothing's permanent except death." She laughed despite the tears starting to fall. "That's dark, but accurate." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about choices, about the stagecoach that had brought her here, the attack that had nearly killed her, Caleb finding her in the sand. Every choice since then had led to this moment, this life. She thought about the desert, how it had stripped everything away until she was just survival and will. How she'd had to rebuild from nothing. Maybe that was the lesson. You couldn't predict what choices would lead where. You could only make the choice in front of you and deal with the consequences. In the morning, she wrote a letter to the education board. The letter said thank you, but no. Explained that her work in Red Mesa wasn't finished, that she had students who needed her, a community that depended on her, a life she'd built from scratch, and wasn't ready to leave. It was the truth. Not all of it. She didn't mention the fear of uprooting her children, the guilt of leaving Caleb to run the ranch alone, the simple fact that she loved this hard life more than she'd ever loved the idea of a comfortable one. But enough of it. She gave the letter to Caleb to mail the next time he went to town. "You sure?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He kissed her forehead. "That's my girl." Life continued. Sarah grew into a serious child who read everything she could find and asked questions that made Elena's head hurt. James was his father's son, quiet, observant, more comfortable with animals than people. Catherine was a force of nature, wild and fearless, and constantly giving Elena heart attacks with her climbing and exploring. The ranch expanded again. They bought the adjacent property when the owner retired, doubling their land, built a second barn, hired more hands, became one of the largest operations in the territory. Caleb was offered a position in the territorial legislature. He turned it down without hesitation. "Why?" Elena asked. "You'd be good at it." "Because I'd have to spend half the year in Phoenix, and I'm not doing that. Not leaving you to run this place alone. Not missing watching our kids grow up." He shrugged. "Some opportunities aren't worth the cost." Elena understood. She'd made the same choice. The years rolled on. Sarah left for college at 16, brilliant and hungry for more than Red Mesa could offer. It broke Elena's heart and filled it with pride in equal measure. James took over more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for it that surprised everyone. Catherine announced at 12 that she was going to be a doctor, and no one doubted her. Elena kept teaching, kept shaping young minds, kept building. Margaret died when Elena was 42. It was sudden, a stroke, gone before anyone could help her. Walter was devastated. The whole county was devastated. She'd been the backbone of the community, the person everyone turned to. At the funeral, person after person told stories about how Margaret had helped them, fed them, advised them, about her sharp tongue and sharper wit, about the way she'd mothered half of Red Mesa, whether they wanted it or not. Elena stood to speak, and the words came from somewhere deep and true. "Margaret told me once that living in fear of what might go wrong was just another way of dying. That you had to choose to live, really live, even knowing everything could fall apart." She looked at Walter, at the community they'd built together. She lived that way every day, built a life so full of love and purpose that even death couldn't diminish it. We're all standing here because of choices she made, because she chose to care, to help, to build something that would outlast her. Elena paused, throat tight. "The desert takes things. That's its nature. It took my family, almost took my life. It's taken people we love, but it can't take what we build together. It can't take community, or love, or the legacy of someone like Margaret, who spent her life making sure people had what they needed. That's the only way we win against the desert. We build things that last longer than we do." She sat down to silence, then slowly people started nodding, started wiping their eyes. After the service, Walter pulled her aside. "Thank you," he said, "for understanding what she meant to all of us. She meant everything to me. Taught me how to survive out here. She'd be proud of what you've built. The school, your family, all of it." He looked old suddenly, diminished. "I don't know how to do this without her. One day at a time, that's all any of us can do." It was what Margaret would have said. Practical. True. No false comfort, just acknowledgement that life was hard and you got through it anyway. Walter moved in with them for a while after that. Not permanently, but he needed people around him. Needed the noise of children and ranch work and life continuing despite the hole Margaret's death had left. He and Caleb worked side by side, two men who'd lost pieces of themselves but kept going anyway. Elena watched them and thought about resilience, about how it wasn't about being strong. It was about showing up even when you didn't want to, doing the work even when it seemed pointless, building even when you knew the desert might take it all away. The territory became a state, Arizona, officially. There were celebrations, parades, speeches about progress and civilization. Elena stood with her family watching the festivities and felt conflicted. Progress was good. Statehood meant better infrastructure, more schools, more opportunities for people like Sarah and Catherine. But it also meant change, meant losing some of the wildness that had defined this place, meant rules and regulations and people who'd never fought the desert telling others how to live. Things are different now, Caleb said that night. Better or worse? Just different. We'll adapt. We always do. He was right. They did adapt. The school became officially accredited. The ranch had to follow new livestock regulations. The town grew. Red Mesa went from 200 people to nearly 1,000 in 5 years. Elena opened a second school, then a third, hired teachers she'd trained herself, created a network of education across the county. She was 50 years old and still building. Sarah came home one summer with a fiancé, a professor of literature she'd met at university. They married in the same spot Elena and Caleb had, on the porch of the ranch house, mountains golden in the sunset. Elena cried watching her daughter pledge her life to someone, remembering her own wedding, how terrified and certain she'd been. "You did good," Caleb whispered. "We did good," she corrected. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county over. They stayed on the land, building a house on the far edge of the property, continuing the work. Catherine left for medical school in California, writing long letters about anatomy and surgery and her determination to come back and serve the people who needed her most. The years accumulated. Grandchildren arrived. Sarah's 2, James's 3. The ranch house expanded again, rooms for visiting family, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Elena's hair went gray. Caleb's beard turned white. Their hands became spotted and worn, marked by decades of work. But they kept going. On their 30th anniversary, Caleb surprised her with a trip. Just the 2 of them, leaving the ranch in James's capable hands. "Where are we going?" Elena asked as they rode away from the property. "You'll see." He took her east, through land that felt familiar but changed. More fences, more settlements, less emptiness. Then she recognized it, the place where he'd found her, the ridge where the buzzards had circled, the spot where she'd lain dying in the sand. Caleb helped her down from the wagon. They stood there together looking at the desert that had nearly killed her 30 years ago. "Why here?" Elena asked. "Because I wanted you to see it. Remember what you survived, what we built from it." Elena looked at the endless expanse of sand and rock and harsh beauty. 30 years ago, this place had been her ending. She'd given up, accepted death, let the desert win. But Caleb had refused to let her die, had fought death itself for a stranger. And in that fight, they'd both found something neither of them had been looking for: a future, a family, a life that mattered. "I used to hate this place," Elena said quietly. "The desert? Thought it was cruel, merciless. It is cruel, it is merciless. But it's also honest. It strips away everything false, everything we pretend about ourselves, makes us face what's real." She looked at him. "I wouldn't have survived if I'd been the person I was in St. Louis. Soft, passive, waiting for someone to give me permission to want things. The desert killed that person, left someone stronger. You were always strong. You just didn't know it." "Maybe, but I wouldn't have found out any other way." She gestured at the emptiness around them. "This place took everything from me. My plans, my certainty, my illusions about what life owed me. But in taking it, it gave me space to build something real, something mine." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I think about when I remember finding you here?" "What?" "I think about choice. You chose to keep breathing when your body wanted to quit. I chose to fight for you when logic said you were too far gone. Every day since has been another choice: to stay, to build, to love, even when it's hard." "You think that's what life is? Just choices?" "I think it's the only thing that's actually ours. The desert doesn't care what we choose. Death doesn't care. Time doesn't care. But we get to choose anyway. That's the whole game." Elena thought about all the choices that had led here. The stagecoach, staying in Red Mesa, marrying Caleb, having children, teaching, building, every single day choosing to show up and do the work. Not all the choices had been right. She'd made mistakes, hurt people, failed more times than she could count. But she'd made the choices anyway, kept choosing, kept building, kept fighting the desert's indifference with her own stubborn insistence on mattering. "Take me home," she said. "Now, we just got here. I've seen enough. I know what this place is, but home, our home, the one we built, that's what I want to see." They rode back as the sun set, the desert painting itself in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and deadly as always. The ranch appeared on the horizon, solid and real. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Lights glowed in the windows. She could see figures moving around. James, probably, checking on the evening chores, maybe his wife getting dinner ready, the grandchildren playing in the yard. Life. Continuing. Built on the foundation she and Caleb had laid 30 years ago with nothing but will and work. "You know what the strangest thing is?" Elena said as they approached. "What?" "I spent my whole life trying to escape. Escape my aunt's house, escape being a burden, escape the desert. Always running towards something better." She looked at the ranch, at everything they'd built. "But the moment I stopped running and started building instead, that's when I found what I'd been looking for." "Which is?" "Home. Not a place, not a building, just belonging, mattering. Having people who need you and you need them and you're all building something together." Caleb smiled, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling. "Took you 30 years to figure that out?" "Some of us are slow learners." "Yeah, but you get there eventually. That's what counts." They pulled up to the house. James came out to help with the wagon, asked how their trip was. The grandchildren ran up demanding attention. Life pulled them back in, immediate and demanding, and exactly where Elena wanted to be. That night, lying in bed with Caleb breathing steadily beside her, Elena thought about the girl who'd lain dying in the sand 3 decades ago. Thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd built, how many lives she'd touched. The desert hadn't broken her. It had just stripped away everything that wasn't essential, leaving only the parts strong enough to survive. And from those surviving pieces, she'd built a legacy, not a perfect one. There were cracks and rough edges and places where the foundation wasn't quite sound. But it stood. It endured. It mattered. Elena closed her eyes, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around her. In the next room, one of the grandchildren cried out in a dream, then settled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, the desert reminding them it was still there. But inside, there was warmth, there was family, there was everything she'd fought for and everything she'd chosen to build instead of running toward something easier. The desert had tried to erase her. Instead, it had revealed her. And what it revealed was strong enough to last. Years later, when Elena was too old to teach anymore, she'd sit on the porch and watch the new teacher, one of her former students, walk children through lessons in the schoolhouse that had expanded to 2 buildings now. She'd watch her grandchildren grow into adults, watch great-grandchildren arrive, loud and messy and full of life. Caleb died first, quietly, in his sleep, the year Elena turned 73. One morning, he just didn't wake up, and the world felt smaller without him. She grieved hard, but she didn't break, because he'd taught her that surviving wasn't the same as living, that showing up mattered, that building something bigger than yourself was the only way to beat the desert's indifference. So she kept showing up, kept building, even in smaller ways, teaching her great-grandchildren to read, advising the school board, documenting the history of Red Mesa so future generations would know where they came from. She lived to see Arizona truly settled, lived to see automobiles and electricity, and all the changes that came with progress. Lived to see 3 of her students become teachers, 2 become doctors, 1 become a lawyer who fought for better conditions for ranch workers. She lived long enough to see that the choices she and Caleb had made 3 decades ago rippled outward, affecting people they'd never meet in ways they'd never know. And when Elena finally died at 87, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the house she'd helped build with her own hands, she died knowing she'd done what she'd set out to do. She'd survived, she'd built, she'd mattered. The desert had taken things from her, her youth, her certainty, eventually her husband. But it had given her something too. Space to become someone she couldn't have been anywhere else. Freedom to build without asking permission. The chance to prove that survival could become legacy if you were stubborn enough. In the end, that was the truth the desert had taught her. Not that life was fair or kind or gentle, but that you could face the harshness head on and build something beautiful anyway. That strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and rebuilding stronger. That love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up day after day, choosing each other even when it was hard. The desert didn't care about any of it, but Elena had cared. And in caring, in choosing, in building, despite the indifference of sand and sun and wind, she'd won. Not by conquering the desert. You couldn't conquer the desert, but by refusing to let it define her, by taking what it gave her, loss and hardship and the stripping away of everything false, and using it to build something true. That was her legacy. Not the school or the ranch or even the children and grandchildren, though those mattered. Her legacy was simpler, proof that you could be half dead in the sand and still become someone who built futures. That the worst thing that ever happened to you could become the foundation for the best thing you ever created. The desert had tried to erase Elena Whitmore. Instead, it had made her unforgettable.